Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming, especially since there's a competing big event downstairs. If neutral space means a space where facts speak louder than everything else, then this is the perfect book. Neha Dixit has spent nearly 9 years reporting this story. And it's really one of the most impactful, well-reported books I've read in a long time. Who is Syeda X? She could be any one of millions of Indian working women. But here's the start of her story. She was married at 15 in a shiny Banarasi sharara to a weaver called Akmal in Banaras. Her dowry included a loom. She's petite, so petite that she finds it difficult to hold on to the straps in a bus. She has shoulder-length braided hair and an expressive face. Or at least that's how she was before life took its toll. She moved to Delhi from Banaras in 1995 with Akmal and their 3 small children in the aftermath of riots triggered by the Babri Masjid demolition. She was forced almost immediately to join the informal sector, something you'll hear more about in this discussion. She got her first job days after landing in Delhi. I think 3 days after. She has held 50 jobs in 30 years, maybe a few more. So Neha, you spent nearly a decade painstakingly putting together Syeda's life and tracking the way the country changed during this time, meticulously interviewing 900 people. In an era of now instant gratification, what was it like to take your time and to bookend this gorgeous story between 2 key moments in our history, the Babri Masjid demolition and the Delhi riots?
Thank you so much, Priya. I'm very honored to be here, to be in conversation with you, and also a little bit nervous because so many people sitting here have mentored me in so many ways. So please excuse me if I say something strange, but I also want to say thank you. Many of you have contributed to this book in many, many ways. The time it took, let me just say this and get it out of the way. I got the New India Fellowship in 2017, and while I was writing the chapters, once I sent I was sending chapters to Ram because he was reading them. And once I said, can you please give me a deadline? And he said that, no, we don't give deadlines. One person just submitted their draft after 13 years. So, but it was very good. So everybody was very indulgent and let me just say generous and nice. And so, which is why it took the time it took. But just getting back to your question, I started meeting a lot of women in 2014 in Delhi who were working in the industrial units. Delhi has a lot of small industrial units, and unlike Kolkata and Bombay, the larger industrial units were ruled out from the Delhi master plan, so which is why the smaller ones exist in so many spaces around Delhi and inside Delhi. And for me, why Syeda and why it happened was because there is a Bangalore element to it. I was working with a news channel from 2010 to 2012. And at that time, a big corporate house had bought 37% share in the news organization that I was working for. And so the editor gathered us and they told us that from now on, our target audience is going to be urban rich. And the prototype for that urban rich person was a 35-year-old male techie sitting in Bangalore. So when he comes back home, he should switch to this channel. So which is why the branding of the news pieces, the bulletin, the graphics, everything should be according to the liking of this 35-year-old Bangalore techie. And so we were told, you guys in the investigations team, don't do these bleeding heart jhola wala stories. All of this doesn't work. And we have to do... and also because at prime time you have to sell kitchen appliances and fancy chimneys and stuff, so you can't do stories on malnutrition and all, so please don't do all that. So that was the time when it was a good experience for me because I realized what is it that I don't want to do in life and I don't have the skills to also. Because we were told, why don't you go do an investigation on the rich kids racing fast cars in South Delhi? So that was the time I started working as an independent journalist because obviously I did not have the skills to do that. So that was the time when the anti-rape movement happened in 2012, and a lot of people were out, and newsrooms suddenly who were dismissive of stories around gender or sexual violence were no longer they wouldn't at least dismiss it. You could do stories on sexual violence. So a lot of news organizations were doing it, and because I was an independent journalist, so I was also doing a lot of stories, but one realized that they were the kind of reporting that was allowed or the kind of space that one got were very episodic in nature. So you had to basically report the event, but not something that happened.
And the details of the violence.
Yes, and the details of the violence, but not what happens before or after. So like I've mentioned in the introduction also, one of the key points was the Muzaffarnagar riots in 2013, where I'd written about a number of women who had faced sexual violence. And for me, what was I also kind of it shook me was because the women hundreds of women had faced sexual violence, but only 7 women went ahead and reported that and filed a case. But once they did that, they had to go back within a few months and work in the same farms of the accused because they were farm workers. These women were farm workers. So which is why it was very important for me then to understand anything that I was writing on sexual violence was not sort of complete if I was not looking at before and after. And in Saida's case, I started going to a lot of industrial units. And when I started speaking initially to a number of women, they spoke about this strike that they had organized and were kind of successful in 2009. This was the strike by almond workers in Delhi. And almond workers are basically, these were people who were cleaning, packaging, pruning almonds and were paid 40 rupees for cleaning a 23 kg bag, which took 12 to 16 hours. And these almonds were basically coming from the Western world, coming to the wholesale market in Delhi. The contractors would give it to the subcontractors. Sometimes the subcontractors would have subcontractors, and then it would go to home-based workers, which Syeda is. So home-based workers are basically people who are employed somewhere or they do work at their own homes, and mostly they are paid per piece or per 12 dozen, so per 144 pieces. So Syeda and many other women, they had conducted the strike in 2009 to demand a 20 rupee raise. And so the strike went on for 15 days, but it was one of the most successful and largest strike of unorganized workers in India.
Led by women.
Led by women. And eventually they did manage to get a 10 rupee raise. And that also led to, because of the strike, there was an increase in the global rates for almonds. Because all your California almonds, everything was coming here, and it was New Year season, so confectionaries. This was also the time when almond milk was becoming like the new thing in fancy diets, all of that. So which is why. So that's why Syeda. And then, of course, in the last 8-9 years, she agreed to speak to me. I spoke to a number of women, but Saida's story eventually, after 3-4 years of reporting in Northeast Delhi, one realized that a lot of things Syeda was saying were actually running parallel with the story of New India and the India of the last 30 years.
Okay, let's hold that thought. Yeah. Let's go back to the point of intersectionality and sexual violence. Although sexual violence is pervasive in the lives of the women you're writing about, you intentionally keep it as one thing that happens to women, and you focus on even Saida's identity of being a Muslim woman in India. And there's a great quote by her, she says, I don't wake up every morning and think I'm going to defeat the Hindu supremacists. It's basically just the business of living that you talk about. Tell us a bit about why you put these two things to the side, although they do come in your story, of course, as they will in the story of any woman. but you chose to focus more on the rest of their lives.
Thank you for that question, because a lot of times I'm increasingly in the last 10 years, when we've seen the rise of Hindu supremacy, we've seen the rise of everything, we know the things that I'm talking about. I just feel that all the conversation about pluralism can only now be successful if we marry caste, class, gender, and geographical location or religion to it. And this, like you said, Syeda, who was so affected by, it's not a spoiler, you know, she was affected by the Babri Masjid demolition. Her loom was burned down is when she moved to Delhi. So she was literally uprooted because of sectarian violence. And towards the end also, she was affected in the 2020 riots, which was not part of my book, but while I was working on it and taking forever to do it, it happened. For her, there's always been a struggle which is a part, even though she's affected again and again by her Muslim identity. The fact that she is a Muslim poor migrant worker in the national capital, that in itself has so many challenges that, like I said, the mainstream media, of course, doesn't want to talk about it. And at the same time, for example, let me give an example. It's like Syeda used to make agarbattis, incense sticks, using cow urine. And so at one point in time, she's making that. And while I was talking to her, she mentioned this, and she said, yeah, I was rolling these agarbattis, and it had this sticker of a cow, and the cow had this gold ornaments and something. So I was like, what is it that you're making? And then she said, we used to use gav mutra. And I was like, of course, okay. And she was like, isme kaun si badi baat hai? And then she was very irritated with me, because she said, I am explaining to you how Banarsi saris are woven, and you are interested in agarbattis. So for her, the gau mutra, whatever, it didn't even register, because it was happening so much. So while this larger politics of majoritarianism, whatever is happening, and people are getting affected in various ways, on the ground, things are unfolding in very different ways. So that's why Syeda and the intersectional
But is
element.
this the same employer who used to employ Hindus and Muslims and was trying to hide from all the cow protection squads and all that? Like, just basically not that she shouldn't tell anyone that that was the same case, right?
Yes. So, because there was a clear business element to it. They said that cow urine, now certain kinds of cow urine you can sell for 200, 300 rupees per liter. And so there's a lot of money to make. And there were all these WhatsApp forwards that if you have cold and cough, then you can put some 2 drops of cow urine in your nostrils and you'll be fine and stuff like that. So lots of people were making money, and there was employment opportunity here. So there, for this person who was clearly interested in making more money, and this area, by the way, I'm talking about is an area where a lot of people from Gujjar community live on the outskirts of Delhi, who were engaged in dairy and all of that, and they never moved out. So they're dependent on this. And so they want to make money, and a lot of workers, migrant workers, are coming from various parts across religions and castes, and they're employing them. So it's just basic transactional thing going on there.
But also, very often the communalism is because of opportunities and wanting to get ahead, and who should get ahead at the expense of whom. And can you tell us what happened in 1991 during the general elections, when there was all these riots and stuff? What were the other factors at play there that pitted Hindus against Muslims in Syeda's world?
Yeah, thank you. Around 1991, everybody knows that there was an opening of the market, liberalization, everything was happening. So this was the time when Syeda and her family, they were basically weavers in Banaras, and there was a lot of competition and a lot of struggle in the handlooms and the cottage industries and for weavers. So suddenly there were these power looms that were making cheap Banarsi replicas. So each power loom displaced 5 or 6 handlooms, I'm forgetting the number right now. So that was happening. The kind of dyes that you were using or the kind of time it took to make a Banarsi handloom sari was something that, and the state did not provide any sort of systemic support, particularly to what is quote unquote called cottage industry, to compete with the global markets and the global companies that were coming in. So that is why there was increased competition. This was also a time when a lot of people were leaving their traditional professions, particularly from socioeconomically marginalized castes, and they were joining weaving. So there was, and this was again the rise of the Hindu right wing and all your Ram Mandir movement and all of that was happening. So this was a time where there was increased competition, so it was easy for the majoritarian forces to go and pit people against each other. And that was also the reason why at one point in the book, Syeda's family also gets affected, because it's easier to sort of, because weaving and Banarsi weaving was, of course, very composite. The fact was, like lots of scholars and Vasanti Raman, many people have said that it's like Tana, Bana, Wop, and Weft. So a lot of Hindu traders were basically traders, and the weavers were Muslims. And this was, so you couldn't exist without each other. But then the Ram Janmabhoomi campaign happened, and the sectarian sentiments were sort of instigated, and that was the time when it was easier to sort of start dividing people, because there's already economic competition on the ground.
So Banaras is only the start of the book. When Syeda and her family move to Delhi, they enter a very different world. This world probably is a few kilometers away from all your favorite haunts in Delhi, but it's a very different universe of informal sector workers. 96% of women workers, Neha says, in our cities are part of the informal sector. This sector accounts for roughly 50% of GDP. Over half of these women are home-based workers. And as she said, they were piece-based, not time-based. And we'll talk a bit more about that later. So Syeda's juggling multiple jobs a day. And if she ever takes time off, even to just, there's some crisis in school with her child, and she goes to school and, the principal's called her. By the time she gets back to her workplace, she's lost her job. Some other poor migrant has taken the job. And 82% of working women in India are concentrated in the informal sector. After agricultural work, home-based work is the single largest working sector for women. And basically, this is the step before piece-based work, is home-based work, is a step before working in a sweatshop, right? Which she does graduate to at some point in the book. And various Supreme Court rulings on polluting industries forced her to move further and further into the margins of the city, from starting at Chandni Chowk to Sabapur and then to Karwal Nagar. So, and of course, the state doesn't consider these people workers, or neither do all the male-dominated trade unions. And then there's the whole question of family honor, and they're not expected to say that they work for all these industries. And their monthly income is a fifth, you said, of the legal minimum wage in Delhi. Yeah. And yet they are the primary breadwinners of this family. I mean, tell us a bit about this city that you saw in such detail for the first time, or how did it change the way you view Delhi, where you had been living for how many years? Since when have you been in Delhi? 2003.
Yeah, so Delhi, of course, because anybody who goes to Delhi, of course, is the power capital. So it's always sort of all the Delhi ka khana and Chandni Chowk ka khana and everything is very nice. And or otherwise, there are all the ministers and seat of power and all of that. So this in this world, Delhi also is very unique in the sense that in many, like whatever little I've seen of the rest of India, I see that in Delhi, there are all these urban poor neighborhoods that are supporting these other neighborhoods, but they're tucked away in a corner. It's not the case in Bombay. I don't know what about Bangalore, but in Delhi they are very much there. So you would see that, like the parts where I live, there's no power cut, and everybody says, "Oh, there's no power cut in South Delhi," but every evening you see that that neighborhood right next to you is getting that power cut, but you don't have it. So it's very divided that way, and at the same time you would see that like for example the areas that I've spoken about in the book, when I started talking to the women, so initial question was, do you work? And they said, nahi, kaam nahi, we don't work. And then you say that, no, but you do clean almonds, or you do stitch footballs, or you do make doorknobs, or you do make tea strainers, or you do make helmet parts. And then they said, no, that's just to, make enough to buy milk for the day, or to buy groceries, or to pay for children's education. So, this answer in itself has so many layers. The fact that first, of course, these are women, and you would see that the male members of the family they would sit idle the whole day. But the sense of self-worth is so high that they are not going to, accept any work which is not giving them bare minimum, at least time-based wages. So if you're working for 8 hours, they will take that work. That's not the case with women. So of course it's gendered, because they're taking this work up to take care of the daily expenses for that day. So that's something that's integral to this home-based economy. And the fact that these sweatshops, right? So a lot of times they say, "Arey, factory, we work in the factories." But they're not, when you go and check them, they're not really factories. There is like one dingy room somewhere. But for them, they call them factories. And they get very annoyed when, some activists come and say, "Arey, these are sweatshops and they should be shut down." So there's all this thing happening on the ground. They don't like activists for one particular reason. The fact that also, one thing I would like to add in this context is that home-based workers only make 1/5 of the daily wage when assisted by at least one more member of the family, and usually it's a female member. So in Syeda's case also, Syeda is always assisted by her daughter Reshma. And so there's a classic sort of thing going on, because each time Syeda has something to do, Reshma picks up the load. So since childhood, she's also been making those things. So Reshma, once she was stitching footballs, because a lot of work has to coincide, it's seasonal, right? So like in the book also I mentioned that if the World Cup is coming, then you have to keep track. And slowly, the home-based workers have started keeping track. Okay, World Cup, we have to keep that week free. And at one point, she has this conversation with the son, and the son's like, "Arey, cricket World Cup is not." She said, "No, soccer World Cup. You don't know what soccer." So all of this happens, and with elections as well. So coming back to what you asked, there is acute sort of marginalization, and it's also invisibilized. Like every now again, Delhi is starting to have the conversation about pollution. And people say, "Oh, 12 years lost because you're living in Delhi." All of that is happening. But every time the authorities have tried to control pollution, starting with 96, the MC Mehta judgment, when industrial units were shut down, and so a lot of them moved to the margins. And Syeda at that point was living in Sabhapur, and so she also moved to a place called, in Chandni Chowk, and she moved to a place called Sabhapur, which is very interesting because that is an urban village, half in Delhi and half in UP. So it's in Delhi, but you can set up the same industrial units in the UP side of the village, because of course UP is UP and UP has whatever, you know what I'm talking about. So that's where she moved. So all of these things, and that's why Reshma later on, when she grows up, she starts working in a mall. And in the mall, she sees all the things that Syeda used to make. And it was very interesting. And she has this disdain for all this pollution conversation. Oh, so again, pollution. Again, they're going to buy air purifier. What do they think? All of that. So all of that. So again, I just want to say the administration or the people in power or the government or political parties, they are always speaking to the middle class and upwards. if you see all the Modi speeches during COVID, I don't know if you remember, he said that if you find some poor person, please help or something like that. That was the tone in many of his. So it was always middle class and upwards. So which means that it's okay to sort of normalize it. It's okay to invisibilize. It's okay to not think and okay, whatever, if you can do something. And that's the same lens applies to all conversation, whether it's pollution, whether it's economy, whether it's anything, any kind of acknowledgement.
And you say in your book that the poor are never provided infrastructure, but always blamed for living in unhygienic conditions and spreading diseases. Yeah. So to go back to the story of Syeda and her daughter. I mean, Syeda got married at 15. Before that, she was the chief caregiver to her mother. And yet the cycle of bad mother-daughter relationship continued with her and her daughter. Can you talk a bit about that?
I mean, it was such a classic generational trauma. Now it has been articulated in Instagram therapy reels. But it's a classic case where Syeda was taking care. So Saida's parents' story is also very interesting because her father was also, her grandfather was a weaver and her father was like, I don't like this and I like music. And I am going to go join Gulab Bai's Nautanki. So it took, for her, it took forever to sort of say that to me because there was still stigma. But the fact that he was a weaver and he joined Gulab Bai's Nautanki in UP and North India. And her mother, who was considered slow, and she was married off to her father to kind of control him, but that obviously never works. And still we keep doing that. So that's what happened. And so Syeda, all her life, she kept saying, oh, she would never treat me like a child. And I had to take care of her, take the mental load to take care of her. And she would keep fighting with us. And we used to have fist fights and da-da-da-da-da. So I didn't get that kind of nurturing and mothering. And then as Syeda moves into this life where every day there's a struggle to survive and pick up a new job and nobody is teaching you those skills. So you have to, from making tea strainers, tomorrow you have to start doing embroidery and nobody's going to teach you that. So that stress of learning that quickly and also earning money, the cup was empty towards the end of it.
And that's all thanks to Delhi.
Yes.
How did Delhi change her?
Delhi changed her because she had this immense interest in cinema and her condition was, I want to marry a man who is interested in watching films. And Tezab was the film that she had seen and Madhuri Dixit's story, and so she wanted to be with someone who's that. So she was really, really interested to the point.
Ek Do Teen was her favorite song.
Ek Do Teen was her favorite song. And then came a point of years of doing this is when she would not talk, she would not chat, or something like she used to say that Banarsi fursat. And she described to me saying, if somebody is laying the road or laying the pipes in Banaras, people would just stand and watch for hours. But once you came to Delhi, that was just not possible. So how that pace in a big city, in the power capital, and in the kind of marginalization that you're subjected to every day, how it changes you to the point where you don't talk and you don't want to do anything. And in that context, Reshma is like, you reach a point where you're always feeling, there's a lot of self-pity, you feel victimized all the time. And Reshma, her daughter, is like, what is this low energy? Why do I have to deal with this all the time? What is this? And so also the fact that Syeda is more conventional. So at one point, Reshma gets a job in a mall, and the mall supervisor says that, listen, you have to wear lipstick because your lips are dark. And Reshma is very thrilled because now I'm going to go tell Syeda, I can wear lipstick. I've been told that in the office, so you please don't say all that.
Whose phone is that?
Yeah, so there is a lot of the dysfunctionality of the Indian family, and within that you situate women, mother, daughter, all of that is happening.
And then there's also man and woman, and the role a woman plays in when hardship strikes and what a man does. I know you said it's partly due to masculinity and all, but basically, Syeda from day one sees Akmal as someone who's manmoji. I love the words you use in the book and the poetry also. And she sees him as whimsical and something that women are not allowed to be, Neha says, you know. And Akmal, meanwhile, is unable to handle Delhi. He goes from skilled weaver to porter, earning 40 rupees a day. He does that for a while, but after that, he's not able to, I don't know, measure up to the times or whatever. He ends up drinking and beating his family. But Syeda doesn't have that option. So how do you see men and women's lives playing out differently?
There are two aspects to it. Of course, the conventional pressures of masculinity in a very stereotypical patriarchal society. We're all aware of it, where you have to behave like this guy. And at the same time, Akmal is also sort of penalized for being a Muslim man who is whimsical, because after the Babri Masjid demolition, something happens in his neighborhood and he's picked up by the police and he's beaten up. And since he comes back, he's just unable to go back to work. So that's how it fundamentally changes him. And then he moves to Delhi. The fact that Syeda, because again it's the conditioning and caregiving and wanting to take care of the family and the parents, and also being conditioned since childhood to pick up the load, you know, fix people's messes, including her mother's and then later on the family. She is doing that, but Akmal gives up, and that's something also you just spoke about, that it is very gendered. Which is the classic conversation. If a man behaves like whatever, he's a creative genius. But if a woman behaves like whatever, then she's, you know, the B word. So it's the same thing playing out here. But in the process, I do want to say something, which is that Syeda is the person who hardens up because she's doing that all the time. And especially Reshma, who's so critical of her mother because low energy and all that. So she finds more comfort in Akmal's company, because Akmal holds out the space for her to be emotional, to care for her, to serve food, to cook food, to do all that, even though he's not earning money, and even though, which Syeda has lost. And that's how Syeda changed in all these years of being, because there's so much sort of pressure cooker situation all the time that you just have to keep performing and keep doing and matching Delhi's pace of being professional and to the point and do your work and then switch to the next one. And that's the difference. And that is something that her sons also sort of pick up, because Saida's sons, Shahzeb and Salman, they are also seeing examples of masculinity around them, and in the films also, Shahzeb is very fond of Salman Khan and all the bikes and all that is happening, and Dhoom 3 is happening, and Amir Khan is performing these stunts. All of that is happening. And then he sees Akmal, who's drunk and who's not doing anything. He doesn't want to be that. And on the other hand, Salman, who's the younger son, but who's actually named after Salman Khan, he is not like that. He wants to be that powerful boy, gets bullied all the time, gets bullied because of his religious identity. There's one part where after the 2002 riots, a lot of these CDs were circulated of the dead bodies from Godhra. I don't know if you remember. And they were shown in one of the RSS shakhas in Karaval Nagar also. And so one of the boys gets up and says, Salman train mein aag kyun lagai? And this Salman, because he wants to be this powerful guy, he doesn't know which train is being talked about, and said, "Haan, lagai to kya hua?" And that's when he faces the consequences. So it's all the time changing with your social location, with your the times that you're living in, your religion, your caste, all of that.
And I think you say it best when you say men make rules, have discussions of what should be done and how it shouldn't be done. But who keeps it all going? Who sustains humanity, or steps up without being told to, or takes the initiative to think of the mundane and the ordinary to hold it all together? Tell us about the markers in India's history that you use to narrate the story of Syeda and why you did that.
So the markers were an afterthought. Like after 3-4 years of collecting information, when I started organizing them and thinking, acha, what is it? What is this book now? Is when I realized that it is basically these 30 years, which I had not thought of earlier. That was not even part of my book proposal initially. And one realized while something was happening in Syeda's life, these bigger events were also happening. For example, some of the things that I've spoken about is when, for example, internet became available through VSNL. And that was the time Syeda is moving to Delhi. Or when Syeda got married, that was the year when voting age was reduced to 18. Later on, for example, introduction of Aadhaar card is when they are doing their almond workers strike. Or when what was it, Mangalyaan, I'm forgetting now, or Chandrayaan or something.
When the day India launched its first space observatory,
yes, yeah.
was the day a clerk got lynched.
Yeah, yeah.
And at around page 200, you come to modern India and what's happening, New India as we call it.
Yeah.
And how did that change Syeda's life?
Yeah, thank you for that, because a lot of these markers are basically something big is happening and making the headlines. And I'm sure the Bangalore techie is interested or was interested then if it existed. But when you see the lives of citizens in the country, this is what is happening simultaneously, and there's no conversation about it. So Akhlaq and New India, I mean, Akhlaq, everybody knows that this person in Dadri, on the outskirts of Delhi, was killed on the accusation of eating beef. And this is something that also affected Syeda, because Salman, her son, who was trying to be this powerful boy, but good, not really, quote-unquote, good for nothing in the conservative or conventional world, was working with someone who was running a transport company. And that's when they were attacked, because in Karawal Nagar, there was a unit, like many places in Delhi, which young boys, Hindu boys, had made a unit called Hindu Kanya Raksha Front. Then it became Gau Raksha Front, GRF. Then it became...
1,000 women are always spoken of in the same breath.
And then it became Unite India Front. So from Hindu Kanya to Gau Raksha to Unite India. So that was the trajectory. And so they were also actively keeping an eye out on which are the trucks that are moving or tempos that are moving. And in one of the incidents, Salman was also affected, and eventually that transport business shut down. So every once in a while in this time span, something is happening high up, and how people are affected on the ground because of their religion. The fact that for example, the right to education came in. And that was the time, within 3 years, Syeda was making Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan bags for 25 paise per bag. That is what she was paid. So yes, something was happening, and it was supposed to be apparently for the children of people like Syeda, but this is what she was getting paid. So if you juxtapose it with whatever was happening and how people were affected, is something that is complicated. Also, to answer your question, the 2020 riots were not part of my book. It's because I took forever is when it happened. But, or the fact that, and how she was again affected. So the cyclical nature of this majoritarianism that exists, and the constant marginalization of people who are poor. So it was happening simultaneously, and which is nowhere in conversation.
And since you mentioned the math of piecework, I'll just read out some of the gigs that Syeda had and the amount of money she made. At one point, she was a buttonhole maker, and she made 15 paisa per hole. Then she worked with cycle brake wires, and she had to use steel strands and plastic sleeves and to prepare 12 dozen brake wires or 144 pieces, she got 80 rupees. Then she stuffed soft toys and she got 1 rupee a piece after stuffing them and stitching them up. She embroidered saris for 5 rupees a piece. And she packed school bags for 60 for 144 pieces, etc. I mean, this is, I mean, you know, we say that it's not even the price of a coffee, but like this is a totally different level of math. So.
And it exists. So the fact that the kind of informal, cheap female labor economy that exists, and that has been the attitude of the state towards any kind of quote-unquote gendered labor. I mean, the same conversation exists for midday meal cooks or ASHA workers, because the whole concept of caregiving, and of course, it's gendered. So why do you need a salary? You better get an honorarium. And the same thing exists here as well. The fact that the state's attitude till 2008, there was no acknowledgement of home-based worker. 2006 is when the Arjun Sen Gupta report came, and finally, there was an acknowledgement of home-based workers in India. And that is also because after liberalization, India started focusing on export more. And so, which is why companies, to escape labor laws and multinational companies outsourcing all the work to India. So which means, I mean, we've heard all those stories, right? Gap and Zara and all those companies getting people here to make the stuff. And the same thing applies here. So to completely circumvent that and to actually not have any conversation, even now in 2008 is when the Unorganized Social Security Act, Workers Act was passed. And since then, we have not seen that, to the point where we are literally in a gig economy, where we still have all the app workers are protesting, nothing's happening. They are doing 2-3 jobs a day, so somebody is delivering food and also doing an Ola, but also doing cleaning work in the morning. That's constantly happening. And so the categorization of what is unorganized, what is organized, what is informal, the boundaries have blurred. And we need to have a conversation from the bottom up again and in a fresh manner to be able to do something about the welfare of workers. And this is not just, I'm talking about working class. Even now within, for example, media that we talk about, we see so many independent journalists or writers. And what happens? Suppose there is a sexual violence case and I'm an independent journalist and I go out and somebody harasses me, who shall I go and complain to? Who's going to redress it? So there is no serious conversation that is happening to think about labor. And in times where, for example, we keep coming back to UP, I just want to say I grew up in UP. And then when I was growing up in UP, we were told, oh, UP is so good, this Bihar so poor, Bengal so poor. And then I came to Delhi and I realized all the nonsense is basically coming from UP. So, but UP sort of dismissed labor rights for 3 years, Yogi Adityanath, right? So these are the times when we are living in. So where's the conversation?
Yeah, and it's the same conversations. I mean, you know, in 1991, we were discussing Gyan Vapi Mosque. This year or last year, there was a strike of almond workers. You know, I mean, it's the same cyclical conversations that are happening. Anyway, one uplifting bit of your book was the friendships that women forge. And it seems to be their only solace in this life, where they are like struggling alone, trying to make ends meet, you know, figuring out. So tell us a bit about female friendships.
So the bit that you read, where I write that, who picks up the load? So that was the point where, actually it is Saida's words and I've paraphrased them. But at one point, Saida, when she moves from Chandni Chowk to Sabapur, basically it's because of the pollution MC Mehta judgment. So she's moving there and her husband comes and drops her and leaves. And that was also the time when Australian team said that we're not going to play in India because lots of pollution and everybody's talking about it. So Akmal comes and drops her there and he leaves. And she's really irritated because, again, he's just dropped me in the middle of nowhere and gone, and he doesn't care because now there's no family pressure also. and her children are cold and hungry, and suddenly there's a person, Razia, who walks up in the morning with namak ka paratha and chai. Nobody has asked her to bring that, but she brings it for someone who she does not know, and she feeds. So that's where she says this, and I've paraphrased it. But over the years, she finds many women who are even in the home-based economy. How does it work? Because you're not really trained to do anything. So basically, you go and assist another home-based worker who's doing that job at home. So you wash her utensils or clean her, help her clean the clothes. And so she gets extra half an hour to teach you how to make these cycle break wires now. So that's how it works. So a lot of work depends on that. So there is Razia who does that. There's another person she meets who's called Nisha Radio Wali. And she's called Radio Wali because in the 70s, when the electronics sector was growing and in Noida was coming up and all of that, a lot of young women, adolescent girls were actually employed in the electronics work industry because you needed nimble fingers and to make all the parts. So that's how she was picked up and started working as an apprentice. And later on, because a lot of women like her were faced abuse in her own maternal home, is when she moved to a place called Bhagirath Palace. Now, sorry, there's a slight diversion there because Bhagirath Palace was actually Begum Samru's palace. And Begum Samru was the first Catholic ruler, only Catholic ruler in India. And she was a Kashmiri dancer who married a Dutch commander and who was called Le Somber or whatever, and then it became Samru in the Indian way of talking. And her husband died, and she was the ruler in North India for a long time. And Begum Samru's, so she moves from her house and starts living in a hostel in Bhagirath Palace, which is an electronics market in India and also one of the biggest ones in Asia. And that's when she starts relating to Begum Samru. And why I'm talking about this is because Delhi's history and all we keep talking about, or even forget Delhi's history. Each time we talk about Taj Mahal and we hear the story of the workers who made it and their hands were chopped off. That's just the conversation, right? So here, Nisha was staying in Begum Samru's palace, which was electronics market, and then they bond over the fact that they see Begum Samru's ghost at night. So that's the kind of bonding that happens. And later on, Nisha also moves to Karawal Nagar. And one thing Nisha does, at one point, Syeda is working in a scrap factory, sweatshop, whatever you want to call it. And Nisha is the supervisor because she can distinguish what is an electronic part and what can be melted from the scrap. And Nisha says, we are going to have a 20-minute lunch break every day because she noticed that the women are not eating. And that was the point. So it also comes from the space of caregiving, and they start calling Nisha's, she's a single woman and she has money, so she can live in Karawal Nagar. And all the women come and hang out at her place and basically say, I am just here to sleep. Because when I'm sleeping at home, these people start waking me up and saying, what is this, where is this, where is that? So just that, and just to hang out. And probably that is the place where they started thinking of a strike. I mean, it was instigated from outside also, but there was a place to actually think about it and demand it.
They had time to brainstorm together. Yeah. And what you say, basically, it was probably the only time in Delhi that she had this shared space and a community. And they used to call it Radio Wali Ki Ashram. Radio Wali Ka Ashram. Now I think we'll ask you to read excerpts from chapter 4, which will explain why the book has the cover it does. If you all can see the images on the cover.
Okay. Tell me if it's too long, okay? I'll stop.
No, it's not too long, please. And keep your questions short.
Okay, this is from chapter 4. It's called Doorknob. एक और आ गई आकाश नापने. One more has arrived to measure the sky. One more woman has come to measure the immeasurable. When Syeda moved to Karawal Nagar, Roopmati said this about her. A few years later, Syeda repeated this for Seema, who then said the same for Khushbu. No one remembers the source of this adage, but it continues to be said for every new migrant woman who joins the workforce in Karawal Nagar. Astronomers measure the sky in degrees, minutes, and seconds to confirm if a star has moved closer to the moon. The women workers of Karawal Nagar count the pieces, the dozens, the kilos of things they prepare to measure how close they are to survival. Things that are necessary for a common person's survival: food, snacks, spices, cosmetics, stationery, garments, automobile parts, books, prints, spare parts, decoration pieces, toys, kitchen appliances, hardware, carpentry tools, plumbing material, building material, devotional items, festival goodies, medical supplies, electric goods, electronic goods. Everything is made and packaged here by women on a per-piece basis. Home-based workers are those who are directly or indirectly employed by an employer and work at home or premises other than the workplace of the employer for remuneration. They are paid piece-based wages, mostly per 12 dozen or 144 pieces, not time-based ones, like those received by workers in a factory who work in shifts. That helps to circumvent the minimum wage set by the government. Syeda was now one of them. Over the next few months, Syeda made wooden, metal, and plastic photo frames and was paid ₹70 for 144 pieces. She then made door hangings, bouquet of flowers, and decorative pieces out of discarded bulbs, which were crocheted with wool for ₹60 for 144 pieces. She picked up thread and needlework too. She finished and packaged school bags for ₹60 for 144 pieces. So there is a lot of that. I'll skip that. Major events trigger demand and supply. When Kalpana Chawla became the first Indian origin woman to go to space in 1997, women in Chandni Chowk and Sabhapur dressed up plastic dolls in hand-stitched white spacesuits. During the 99 Cricket World Cup, everyone wanted 4 leather balls, so the women sat in Sukhbir Gujjar's farms and stitched hundreds every day to be supplied to the Sadar Bazaar wholesale market. In 1999, when Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee made a goodwill visit to Pakistan on the inaugural trip of a cross-border friendship bus service between the two countries, they stuck India-Pakistan stickers on several miniature buses to be sold in toy shops. In 2001, when Monkey Man, a roughly 4-foot-tall creature with a helmet, metal claws, thick black hair, glowing eyes, and buttons on his chest, became an urban legend and was reported to have attacked several people in Delhi, but was never caught by the police, they made Monkey Man masks to be sold at traffic signals. Syeda learned to keep track of upcoming festivals a few months in advance. I'll skip some bit of it. She had perfected making rakhis for Raksha Bandhan. She prepared mehndi cones and decorated karwas, earthen pots for Karwa Chauth. Before Navratri was a rush to stitch Mata ki chundri. For Ramzan, prayer rugs had to be prepared. For Diwali, string lights had to be prepared. I'm skipping a lot of this. Lohri meant packaging Revdi, Gajak. New Year brought orders for making paper confetti. For elections, they made flags, keyrings, and caps for various political parties. For the new academic year, they packaged crayons and school bags and bound books. Over time, she put together a toolbox which she fondly called her Jadu Ka Pitara. Reshma later started referring to her as her CV, the only comprehensive testament to the variety of jobs she had done for years. It was an iron trunk as big as a coffee table, her constant companion. It contained pliers, screwdrivers, wrenches in all sizes, a screw gauge, needles of all shapes, threads of varying thickness, nuts and bolts, sequins and beads, tapes and aluminum wires, among other things. I'll stop at this.
Thank you, Neha. That was brilliant. Anything else you'd like to add before we open it up for questions?
I think let's just have a conversation. Okay. I've said enough.
Sure. Any questions?
Hi, a nice conversation. I came a little bit late. Is there any other story? Why only particular this story? Because you're talking about full India, right? You're specifying about one particular family. Is there some multiple examples to narrate this?
So the reason why it's called Syeda X is because it's not just one person, it could be any woman in the current times that we live in. So it's the story of the majority of the country people who are invisibilized, and it's almost normalized to not see the work that they are putting in to prop up and to create the infrastructure for the country to survive.
Hello. Hi, thanks so much for this book and the talk. I just had a small question because you said it intersected with a lot of the stories of the last 10 years or so. So one is on the end of, the technocracy, this story of the direct cash transfers being this thing that has provided a floor or whatever. Did that intersect at all in the lives of the characters here? And the other was the Aam Aadmi Party's, free bus for women, free electricity, schools. You hear about all of that in the news cycle. So did any of that also intersect in the lives or not? Or what was the story?
Yeah, thank you for that question, because the key events like demonetization or GST or even your Digital India and then later on CANRC, all of this had a huge impact on the lives of so many like Syeda. For the fact that a home-based economy is totally cash-driven. So the fact that demonetization completely almost destroyed the lives of people for a number of months. And I do want to say that this was also a time when earlier when you would go to a number of these settlements, you would see people having, doing a tadka in oil and having potato curry every day in the evening. To the time when it shifted, because edible oil is so expensive now and everything eatable is so expensive, you would see that in many of the houses they just boil potato with salt, and in the bowl that they serve children is when they put few drops of oil, because it's just so impossible to. So these are the kind of changes that one has seen during demonetization. For example, people were not cooking thrice a day to save fuel, or the fact that there was limited work, like at that point she was sticking bindis and so the work was so less and the people were so many of the people were had no work, so there was no money at all. Or the fact that GST, once you start applying GST and in an informal economy, again the prices go up, and so the little money that the home-based workers are paid, even that goes down. So that has happened. Digital India had a huge impact, and I do want to say at one point, Reshma starts working in a cyber cafe which turns into a digital seva kendra. And this was a time when lots of people, suddenly Digital India has been introduced. So yeah, great, technology is great and everything, equalizer will solve all problem. But basically people, just because people are watching YouTube and WhatsApp does not mean that they have digital skills. So which is why all these digital seva kendras came up, and how they were also sort of so important when CA was introduced, or when the CANRC was forcefully about to be implemented by the state. So people running and wanting to get documents made, and then spellings are different, their age is different, they don't have them, or whatever, all those discrepancies exist. So that is something that one needs to take care of. Or the fact that everything that is imposed, for example, all the smart city projects, right? Like smart city, yes, you will have Wi-Fi at the bus stop, but for what? Right? There has to be like some reasoning that needs to be done, which is obviously not there. Or the fact that when Aadhaar was introduced, everybody was told, now you're not going to need any more documents, but that never happened. So all these things, how they affect people for let me just say, just bear with me if I say for the elite, the Aadhaar conversation could be about privacy. But that conversation, if somebody is depending to get or depending on the Aadhaar to get ration, the privacy conversation does not exist. So there is a gap in the conversations that are also happening, but at the same time, people are hugely impacted by all these fancy things that are imposed from above.
And nobody has bank accounts, right? At one point you say Reshma is the only one who had a bank account, so she started charging a fee to during
During demonetization, because there are all these industries which are of course cash driven, and so Reshma had a bank account, and so she started charging 100 rupees for every whatever 1,000 rupees that she was exchanging. So she was not like her mother, and that's why she keeps saying, I am not like this. And Syeda is very upset that you are UP wali, and she's like, I am Delhi wali, so don't do all this with me. So she is very cutthroat about it. And of course, and Reshma, while she was working in the mall, she would see at home, because of demonetization, people are not able to cook. And in the mall, people are coming and buying and wasting food, and there is electricity, there's thousands of kgs of food that is thrown every day and nobody cares. So that disparity, and living in that disparity, it always exists. And so then in that, whatever empathy you can have for each other is something that one has to think about.
Hello. Thank you for doing this. Must have been a really frustrating and also very moving moment for you. So I think I really owe you a big applause for exposing something like this to a large audience like this. And you mentioned something like 30 years time span. I'm trying to put a number to it. So is it right to say it's from 95 upwards?
No, in the book it's from 88, 90 to 2020.
To 2020.
End of 2020. Yeah.
Mm. And then, I mean, as a question about being a woman and also doing this kind of a work, would you imagine a man being able to do something like this? Or was it something which kind of like struck you as, oh, okay, this is something which I have to expose because I am a woman?
Okay, in my mind, I am not exposing anything. I am just, everything that we are seeing is what I've put out. I keep saying this all the time, and I've almost become repetitive when I say it. Each time for me, like personally speaking, I don't know if it's related to your question, but each time I'm introduced, they'll say, this is Neha Dixit and she writes on women's issues. And it really, really is irritating, because the fact that I have done all kinds of reportings, but the fact that there are, if I'm talking about labor, I'm talking to women. If I'm talking about police encounters, I'm talking to women in the family and not whatever. So each time it's sort of seen as a woman doing it. So not, to just add another layer to what you said, I am talking about labor and I'm talking about India. Yes, as a woman, Syeda's story becomes far more complicated because it does not get talked about, but there are various things to it. For example, for me as a woman, it was easier to me to have informal chats with a lot of women. So yes, that's true. But at the same time, I would say it was also sort of complicated because how do I talk to all these big burly boys from Hindu Kanya Raksha Front and Gau Raksha Front and whatever. And that's when one thing I have learned, which I used here also, is that a lot of times people love to mansplain. So I used to fight it initially. But now I behave like, oh, I am this person who has no brains. Can you please explain it to me? And they end up telling me more than they would tell a male reporter. So I just use that all the time. So that's how it was helpful, yeah.
Thank you so much, Neha and Priya. If I may, to shift the focus a little bit from Syeda to you, the writer, I was just wondering that writing about something, researching something for so long, the other variable is the writer herself, right? Could you share a little bit about how the process of this research for so long and the writing has been, as you also shift and change, because I've been an admirer of your work for a very long time and seen your writing shift and change also. How does that then impact a book that is the sort of almost like a ultimate thing that comes out of this?
Thank you for that question. writing process, don't even talk about it. I became a very nasty, irritable person. So I'm very happy that this book is done and nobody has to deal with my nasty side any longer. For what has changed for me is I realized that I was, after 3-4 years of reporting, I realized it's really great that I have this opportunity to talk about various things simultaneously. And that also helped me in thinking about my reporting differently, because I started out with an investigative magazine called Tehelka, and we were doing very pointed investigation. This happened, that happened, that happened, and that was great. But it's only when I started working independently and I realized that, okay, if you write long form, you get paid more. So which is why you have to talk about more things. And then, of course, the book happened. So for me, I was very, let me just say, trying to be politically correct all the time in my news reporting. But with the book, it made me, I think, realize that this is something that I'm imposing from outside. This is not how things exist in the world. So for me, that was a fundamental change in terms of thinking about things. And I'm judgmental, but still trying to be less judgmental. So all of that has come in. For example, like Syeda's response to sexual violence is not a politically correct response. And with all our conversations and whatever, I do want it to be that correct response. But that is not how, in reality, stuff is, and how people survive and what their realities are is very complicated. So stuff like that.
Hi. So, if I may, can you give us some picture into the behind the scenes? Like, where did you meet her, and did she hide? Did she have to hide and come from a family, or what is she doing now, and those sort of things?
Okay, where to meet? There are lots of people like Syeda one can meet. She currently lives in a place called Nazbandi Colony because she was affected in the, she was affected in the 2020 riots, and she moved to a place called Nazbandi Colony, which is on the outskirts of Delhi, so in Ghaziabad, and that's where she lives, and she continues to work in Tronka city. Akmal these days is again not working. That's pretty much about her. I have changed the names of most of the people in the book because there were ethical considerations that I had to make, where the story was far more important than telling their names because they have several threats. One being the fact that without spoilers, the Shazib situation you will read in the book, or Akmal had previous cases. So yeah, so that's what they're doing right now, and yeah.
No, I think you wanted to know, where did you guys meet? You met at the Almond. You heard about her through that. Yeah. But where, when you interviewed her, where was that happening?
So it happened at many places, in people's houses, in the sweatshops, in the factories. Once I tried to. I made frantic calls to Ram and many other people that I want to go, and should I go and start working in a sweatshop, and I was trying to think that I'm so cool, but that didn't work because they immediately sort of could figure out that you are not that, no matter how much you try. Your body language and your privilege, all of that shows. So, but in the workplaces, in the sweatshops, in the factories, in the police station, in the public parks where the RSS was holding shakas, in the temples that have come up, in the several mosques that have come up, in the relief camps. So yeah, that's where or in a number of industrial units that are there in Delhi, Jahangir, Puri, Wazirpur, Tronka city. So that's where the conversations happen, but essentially at home. Let me just say that it was complicated because they were working for 16 hours, and then to expect them to talk about the same thing to me was just not okay. And the other thing that my learning also during reporting and before that also was that the fact that if you ask personal questions, you will also be asked personal questions, and you better answer those questions, right? So the fact that every person, every woman who I meet, the first thing I have to explain is, why don't I have children? And so, and the gaze is inverted. Because I am thinking, oh, I'm writing about working women, and I'm going to write whatever. And once someone said that, poor thing does not have children, and see where all she has to go for her work. So that's how. So yeah, it was always this.
So, yeah, so we clearly understand that you've done a very extensive research. So what did you find a need to find a solution to a Saida's life? Because clearly us talking about it in a room will not change it. Like, what is the solution to a Saida's life? Because we see Sahidas every day in our lives. We are very oblivion to it. We'll hear the story and we'll move on with our lives tomorrow. So what's the solution to it?
No, I don't think we'll move on. If we are talking about the fact that the chairs that we are sitting in, one part of the chair has been assembled by some woman, and the electric wires that you are using here, or the pen that I'm using here, or the stationery, that if you just start paying attention, that's the starting point to change anything. So I don't think, at least in my humble opinion, I'm not cynical about this whole situation. I think the first thing that one needs to do is start observing and start seeing what has been invisibilized in front of us by the media, by various conversations, by our privilege, all of that. If we just start noticing that, that is the first point to make any change. So let's just start noticing.
Thank you for all the insights. What are you eventually hoping to get out of this? Do you think there'll be a difference or a change or anything like that? Or has it already happened, or you're hoping it will happen?
So for, just in continuation to your question, I have just learned from this. I am not hoping for anything drastic, but in whatever 17 years of journalism, I have understood that we are all cogs in the wheels. So all the cogs have to do their work, and as one cog in that wheel, I have done my work, and the rest of the cogs have to move. So that's definitely there. One example I'll give you from the book, where the almond workers go for a strike, and after this 15 days of strike and a lot of violence and caste violence and all of that happens, Reshma then sort of is being sarcastic with her mother and saying, oh, only 10 rupee raise and still you were doing all this. But that 10 rupee raise, Syeda responds that, oh, I can buy groceries for 15 days. But also the fact that, some of the women say in the book that even our people at home, our husbands, our partners, our male members of the family, they don't listen to us. But here we did something and something has moved. So that small bit that has changed, that in itself is something that is going to take it forward.
Hi. You spoke about how Reshma had the waste at the mall, the extravagance at the mall, and the hardships at home. And you also spoke about your own privilege, how you could not pass for a sweatshop worker. It's a question, I guess, for every journalist, really. When you go there, when you see how the other 99% live, the price of a cup of coffee, how did it affect you when you went back and bought a cup of coffee for her daily wages? Or did you manage to make that break, or did it play on your mind, especially through the writing of the book?
Yeah, thank you for that, because here I am privileged in many ways in the current contemporary India that I live in, right? I have legal cases, but I'm still not in jail because I have a Hindu upper caste name, right? And so there is the caste, religion, class, privilege, so all of that. And it is all the time complicated for us, but one small thing, and I don't know what are the larger ways of dealing with this. For me, I told myself, I am not going to let my privilege paralyze me. I will not let the guilt sort of paralyze me. So I will try to do whatever little I will do. And here I'm not doing anything, I'm merely reporting what is happening. It's not in my hands to change something, but at least I can report about it. So that's all. So yes, one felt guilty many times. Each time one came back from the relief camp or whatever. But this is what one stuck to.
Thank you, Neha. It's a very beautifully written book, and yet I couldn't read it in one go. I had to keep putting it aside because one dreadful thing after another happens, and so when Salman dies, I kept the book aside for
No spoilers.
I had to put away the book for 2 days. And I wonder, how does Syeda keep picking herself up and going on the way she does? What is there that drives her? And how could you write? You know, it is very difficult. It's a very difficult life.
Thank you, Mohan. Like throughout the book that you see, that there is a constant, like there is no luxury of time here. That's one thing. Because if you don't work for 1 week, means that you are completely poor and you've fallen into the abyss and you will not be able to rise. So every small or big thing that has happened, the only thing that kind of, and it's psychological also, right? Why to sort of, it's universal because a lot of people deal with grief by being workaholics. And that's definitely here because you don't want to think about it. And there is no structural mechanism available for you to address your grief. And so, which is why the only thing that you see that can distract you is work. So that's definitely there, which is universal. And here there is a class angle, of course, to it, because if you don't work, then you don't sort of get food on the table. So that's how essentially these are the two things that out of necessity and out of no other mechanism to deal with grief or even trauma, or we have all these conversations about mental health now in a very sort of individualized, elite way. What is the scope? How is it available for every person around us? It's not available. So that's how people deal with it in whichever way they think they can.
I would also like to answer this question in Neha's words. Somewhere in the book she says, in Delhi, Syeda had switched to communicating in monosyllables and signs. She stopped caring what she looked like. She didn't engage in casual conversation. She was always preoccupied. Bas kaam se kaam. Mind one's own business. Like professional Delhi people. The insides were empty. There was nothing to give to anyone, not even a smile. She had lost her zest for life. She had a wooden look, and there was no joy in her laughter.
I guess my question is kind of about the process. I remember a few years back, I tried to do some primary research on my own with poor women, and I was met with like some degree of skepticism by them. A lot of them were, they were unwilling to talk to me. So I guess I was just kind of wondering, like, is that also partly why it took so long? Because you probably had to form bonds with a lot of these women before you could talk about, their lives. And also, equally, I want to ask, like, when you went to these women's houses, like, how did the men kind of respond to you asking them questions and taking a keen interest in the women's lives? Like, did they feel any kind of way about it? Were they pressed about it? Like,
so in my experience, I would say that this is across classes. This is not just for poor women. This is also for any set of women that you want to speak to. If you start going and asking them personal questions on day one, that's not going to happen. If somebody is coming and asking me something personal, I don't owe anyone anything. So that's not just for this book, but even for other cases of reporting, I have realized that the only conversations that are possible is when a lot of time is spent. For example, one that really sort of confirmed this for me was when I was speaking to a lot of women in the Muzaffarnagar riots relief camp. And I spent a couple of weeks where they kept saying that I know about that woman faced sexual violence, this happened, that happened. And towards the end of 5 weeks, you realize all throughout they were talking about themselves. So that's how people open up. They don't owe you anything. And so this is not just for poor women, this is women or people just across sections, across castes, across religions. So it's the only way trust can be built is in a very genuine way, not in an extractive way. I also feel that all this whole conversation about being objective in media, it's also a very sort of corporate way of thinking about dealing with people. If you're dealing with truth and if you're dealing with people's lives, what is the truth is truth and there's no objectivity. You can't really have a distance from people who are talking about these very intense things. So time and trust building is the only way that can help.
Thank you, Priya. I'll try my best to keep my question quick because I think we're also on
10
time.
seconds.
I'll definitely fail that. So, first, as a somewhat former techie, I want to apologize for the havoc that my cohort sort of wreaked on your newsroom. But so throughout this conversation, a couple of times we've touched on majoritarianism and New India and those aspects, and of course, a lot of us see that, but not quite experiencing it in the same way. But somewhere you also touched on interdependence, right? And I just wanted to ask, from your reporting, and obviously not anything that's in the book because no spoilers. But did you see more examples of interdependence and coexistence, or even I guess coexistence at this stage between Hindus and Muslims, that those of us looking to exercise our hope muscles can sort of take back?
He's seeking hope, yeah.
So just to respond to the first part of what you said, it's not just you, okay? So there are all these times they come up with these fancy market surveys. At another point, we were told that there is some market research that has happened that say that millennial women onwards, they are using internet more. But they are only interested in what is called near news. So what is near news? Near news is how to reduce your tummy in 10 days and which lipstick shade to wear to work. And they're not interested in hard news and also positive stories and career interest stories. And so which is why Washington Post has launched the Lily, and in Times of India has launched iDiva, and so forth and so forth. So every time, so not just the Bangalore techie, but many others. So undermining everybody's intelligence is like a thing. Hope, of course, yes, because it's just not possible throughout the book. Whatever I have experienced and reported, I have seen, whether it was Banaras, whether it was industrial units in Northeast Delhi, the fact that workers are coming from all across and all religions and all castes. So at one point in Karawal Nagar, they keep saying that, okay, Bihari Muslims are fighting with UP Muslims and Gujjars are fighting with Jats, and Hindu Gujjars are fighting with Muslim Gujjars. All of this is happening. But that in the words of Vasanti Raman, that Tana-Bana coexistence sort of is there. Even during the Delhi riots, you would see that there was a lot of targeted violence, that Muslim-owned businesses were attacked. But at the same time, in those businesses were also feeding the businesses owned by the Hindu traders in Karawal Nagar. So everybody had to come back. The rent economy is huge. Like in Delhi and like any other metropolitan city, the rent economy is huge. So till when can you just say, yes, it is, we keep hearing that Muslims are not getting houses, but in this, and that is definitely true, and Syeda was also denied houses. But there were also some Hindu owners who were trying to cater to GRF and Hindu Kanya Raksha Front and Gau Raksha Front and Unite in Front. But at the same time, they couldn't sustain it after a few months. So things are constantly changing because of their circumstances. There is coexistence. It may not be like a melting pot, but it's like a salad bowl. It's there. Yeah.
Last question.
Excuse me. Ma'am. Excuse me, ma'am. Wait for the mic, please.
Yeah, I'll be quick. So do you think what is the role of the state when it comes to workers like Syeda? Do you think have you seen, firstly, any change in sort of the state's attitude towards workers like this who work from home in the last 30 years that you worked on it? And do you think we could expect some sort of intervention from the state to make their lives more fair and their work more, the remuneration more fair? Did you see any steps from the state to do that? Do you expect that?
Apart from the 2008 Act that was implemented late in 2008 on unorganized workers, where they started making cards, welfare cards for workers, and that's what so each time you go to any area, the activists only actually work on getting workers card made for people so that they get some sort of pension or some kind of welfare, because that is the only way now to see and get any kind of get any kind of government help for the workers. Since then, nothing has happened, and the gig economy has sort of increased, and there is no political will actually to think of labor. Even when they keep talking about labor inspections and labor rights, basically it's just shutting down those so-called sweatshops. You shut them down, but then what happens to those people, right? So that there is no political will to fix it. There is no comprehensive way to work at it. A lot of trade unions, for example, have started now making a mohalla level, neighborhood level union, right? So why they have started doing that is because there is no same factory floor, not same set of people are not doing the same work. And so the only way to unionize is to make a union in a particular neighborhood. And so some of those things have helped, but from the state, no, nothing has happened.
Last question.
Okay. Neha, of course, I'm waiting to go through this book, but my question is not about the book. It is as an investigative journalist, which was your most exciting or most consuming or interesting experience?
I don't think I can pick one. But I can definitely tell you about one of the first reporting assignment where I got like slap of my life, which is not literally, but I was fresh out of college and learned all the feminism, and all the Khap Panchayats were issuing diktats for honor killings, and then I went to one Khap Panchayat leader, and Haryana was called the gold mine then, because if you were a Delhi reporter, just go to Haryana and there'll be some story. So I went to one Khap Panchayat leader, and where he properly schooled me, and he said, oh, you won. If you were a woman from our community roaming around as a male camera person, we would have hung you or whatever. And that really got me angry. And then he started saying very like sexist, misogynist things, and I started arguing with him. And then he said, I will not give you the interview. And then I came back to Delhi and got a big jhad from my editors, who were obviously paying for the conveyance and doing whatever. And that's when I realized, as a reporter, whether investigative or whatever, my job is to get information, and anything that I'm exposing will be exposed in the writing, not on the spot. So that is one learning that I got.
One gentleman has one last question.
My name is Krishna Swami Alladi. Krishna Swami is a Hindu name, Allah is the Muslim name. So I have four servants in my house. 2 are Christians, 1 is a Muslim, and 1 is a Hindu. 3 of them worked in sweatshops, making all this, like what you're saying, dolls. So I used to visit some of these places. I picked up 3 of them. I said, come and work for me. I'll give you a better life. So there are 3 maids and 1 guy. 1 is a driver. 5th guy is a part-time driver. He is a Muslim. Now, I was giving them about a reasonable salary, about 10,000 rupees a month, plus food and all that. Then they were asking for loans. I said, what are your husbands doing? They said, they're all drinking. They don't do any work. We earn for them and they drink. So I told them, okay, bring one of your husbands. I'll drink with him. So I drank with him one day, gave him a full bottle, asked him to drink. Then next day, after 2 days, he came back, sir, I'm really sorry. I don't know what to do with my life. Then I put him as a driver. I sent him a driving school. I paid him about $10,000 to learn driving. And now he's a driver. He's earning 20,000 to 30,000 rupees. I'm going to do the same with the
question, please.
The question is,
you got the last question.
what is it?
So
That man said, what is the
question good?
Yeah. That man said, what is the solution for all this? I said, the society, which are us, should do something about it. That is my solution for this.
Yeah, but
Thank
we
you.
can't absolve the state's responsibility and say we should all be doing something. Thank you, Neha.
Thank you so
It was
much.
brilliant
Thanks. It was
talking
such
to
a
you.
pleasure. Thank you.